Paris, 1932, a city of bustling streets, echoing laughter, and the smell of fresh bread. Yet for 8-year-old Jacques Lusseyran, the world is about to change forever in a single catastrophic accident that robs him of his sight. A fall onto a sharp desk corner, leaving him in permanent darkness. And while most children might crumble under such a loss, Jacques discovers a startling truth. Blindness is not the end of perception, but the beginning of a different kind of vision, one that sharpens every other sense and allows him to navigate the world through sound, touch, smell, and an uncanny intuition. And with the guidance of his determined parents, he learns to move through Paris with descriptive words, recognizing distances by echoes, feeling the presence of people by subtle vibrations in the air, and slowly develops a heightened awareness of human nature, sensing courage, fear, and deception in ways that sighted people cannot. And as Europe darkens under Hitler's rise, Jacques, now a teenager, perceives the gathering storm in ways others ignore, understanding that resistance will not be easy, but is necessary. And when the Nazis march into Paris in June 1940, he immediately begins to organize, not with weapons, but with intelligence, information, and courage, forming one of the first youth resistance networks, Les Volontaires de la Liberté, training friends to move secretly, distribute leaflets, and communicate safely. And though he cannot see the dangers around every corner, he senses them in the tension of voices, the rhythm of footsteps, the subtle shifts in the air, using this extraordinary perception to vet members, coordinate meetings, and anticipate betrayal. And over time his network grows in both skill and numbers, reaching hundreds of young resistors. And even as the Gestapo infiltrates French resistance groups, Jacques remains one step ahead, relying on intuition and an almost preternatural sense of human behavior, teaching others to observe without sight, to feel danger and truth through their other senses. And in doing so, he becomes a leader whose influence extends far beyond his age, inspiring loyalty and courage in everyone around him. And yet the stakes are ever present. Every leaflet, every meeting carries the threat of death. And when betrayal strikes and one of their own is captured and coerced into revealing names, Jacques is forced into the ultimate test of his resolve, dragged before Nazi officers who underestimate him simply because he is blind. And yet they cannot break him, cannot pierce the calm and focus he radiates. And in this crucible, Jacques' genius and bravery manifest fully, showing the world that true vision is not limited to the eyes, that the courage to resist, the insight to perceive truth, and the moral clarity to act can allow even a blind teenager to outsmart one of history's most feared regimes. And as the shadows of occupation deepen over Paris, Jacques prepares for the unimaginable challenges ahead, from interrogation to concentration camps, and through it all, his inner light, his perception, and his courage will guide him, setting the stage for one of the most extraordinary stories of resistance in history. As Paris settles into the oppressive rhythm of occupation, Jacques Lusseyran, now 16, begins to transform his small group of friends into a disciplined network of young resistors, moving through streets that are simultaneously familiar and dangerous, learning to sense every patrol, every collaborator, every whispered threat, using his blindness not as a weakness, but as a tool, for he has trained himself to perceive the world in ways sighted people cannot, detecting the smallest changes in the environment, the subtle nervousness in a voice, the rhythm of approaching footsteps, the tension that hangs in the air when someone untrustworthy is near. And with this extraordinary intuition, he begins recruiting others, carefully evaluating who can be trusted with his life and the lives of countless others, organizing secret meetings in hidden apartments, churches, and basements, coordinating the printing and distribution of leaflets that challenge Nazi propaganda and give hope to a frightened population. At each time a new member joins, Jacques teaches them not just strategy and secrecy, but also how to perceive danger with all senses, to listen, to feel, to read the invisible currents of fear and courage. And as the months pass, the network expands, connecting young resistors across the city, creating a web of communication and intelligence that the Nazis struggle to detect. And yet, despite these successes, the shadow of betrayal always looms,
for the Gestapo is methodical, patient, and relentless. And Jacques knows that one mistake could unravel everything he has built, that one slip could mean arrest, torture, or death. And so he moves with absolute care, relying on memory, intuition, and the extraordinary training he has given himself and his comrades, memorizing every street, every safe house, every subtle change in the city that signals danger. And when the time comes to intercept Nazi propaganda, to leave leaflets in impossible places, to warn civilians, Jacques is always at the center, directing operations with a calm authority that belies his age, inspiring loyalty and courage in those around him. And even when the Gestapo begins to close in, sensing the existence of resistance groups through informants and routine surveillance, Jacques manages to stay one step ahead, using misdirection, timing, and psychological insight to keep his members safe, to continue spreading hope in a city that is slowly suffocating under occupation. And as he moves through this world of fear and deception, Jacques demonstrates a rare ability to remain composed under extreme pressure, sensing threats before they appear, feeling the presence of danger like a shadow brushing against him. And even when arrests begin to strike at his network, he uses every ounce of his perception and experience to protect as many of his comrades as possible, finding new routes, creating safe codes, and adapting constantly, all while the Nazis underestimate him because he is blind, seeing him as weak or dependent, unaware that his disability has honed abilities that make him almost impossible to deceive or intimidate. And it is through this combination of courage, intuition, and strategic brilliance that Jacques Lusseyran manages to keep the heart of the youth resistance alive, continuing to challenge Nazi authority, spreading information, hope, and courage, all while preparing himself for the inevitable confrontation with the Gestapo, knowing that the more he outsmarts them now, the greater the chances of survival for himself, his friends, and the ideals he fights to protect. And it is in these months of careful planning, constant vigilance, and unwavering resolve that Jacques builds the foundation for the extraordinary feats of resistance that will define him, demonstrating to the world that true leadership, vision, and bravery are not defined by sight, but by insight, courage, and an unbreakable commitment to justice. And as the Nazis tighten their grip on Paris, Jacques' network stands as a testament to the power of ingenuity, trust, and human resilience, setting the stage for a confrontation with forces far stronger than any teenager could normally withstand. But in Jacques Lusseyran, the blind boy who learned to see with everything he has, the Nazis have met an opponent they cannot fully comprehend, a young man whose perception, bravery, and moral clarity make him one of the most extraordinary resistors in history, and whose story is only beginning to unfold as danger, betrayal, and unimaginable challenges await just beyond the horizon.
As Jacques Lusseyran's resistance network, Les Volontaires de la Liberté, grows, the stakes rise with every leaflet, meeting, and recruit carefully tested for loyalty. And though the Nazis tighten their grip on Paris, Jacques relies on his extraordinary perception to stay one step ahead, sensing threats before they appear, detecting hesitation, fear, or deceit in subtle shifts of voice and movement, and teaching his comrades to trust intuition as much as planning, so that even the youngest members can navigate danger. Yet despite all precautions, betrayal strikes when an informant cracks under pressure and reveals names to the Gestapo, sending waves of arrests through the city, turning familiar streets into traps, and forcing Jacques to rely on memory, improvisation, and his inner light to protect as many people as possible, demonstrating a rare combination of bravery, ingenuity, and empathy as he guides his friends without showing fear, understanding that his calm presence is a shield for everyone around him.
And when he is inevitably captured and brought before the Gestapo, the officers assume blindness equals weakness, confident that a teenager could not mastermind such a network. Yet Jacques meets their intimidation with calm defiance, revealing nothing about his comrades, while mentally mapping escape routes, preserving crucial knowledge, and observing every detail, showing that true vision is not limited to sight. And even as he is shuffled through the Nazi system toward the looming threat of a concentration camp, his courage and strategic mind inspire others, proving that insight, perception, and moral clarity can outsmart even the most feared enemies. And in this crucible of danger and betrayal, Jacques remains unbroken, the blind boy whose extraordinary abilities allow him to survive, resist, and continue the fight, a living symbol of hope, ingenuity, and defiance in the face of overwhelming darkness.
Captured by the Gestapo and thrown into the cold, oppressive interrogation rooms of Nazi Paris, Jacques Lusseyran faces a crucible designed to break even the strongest. Yet, despite his blindness, he navigates the darkness with extraordinary calm, relying on heightened senses to detect every subtle shifting tone, hesitation, and hidden threat. And though the officers strike, shout, and try to intimidate him, confident that a blind teenager could never lead a resistance network, he remains composed, revealing nothing about his comrades, while mentally mapping the room, memorizing guard routines, and turning every question into information he can use, his mind working faster than the men who believe they control him. And as they escalate their tactics with fear, psychological pressure, and isolation, he adapts, using silence, carefully measured words, and subtle misdirection to protect the identities of his network, preserving crucial knowledge that may save lives later. And even as the shadow of imprisonment looms, the young man who cannot see relies on perception, intuition, and an inner resolve to maintain control, proving that courage, strategy, and insight can outmatch brute force. And in this tense standoff between a blind teenager and some of the most feared interrogators in history, he demonstrates that true vision is not measured by the eyes, but by clarity of mind, moral strength, and the ability to anticipate danger, setting the stage for the unimaginable trials to come in Buchenwald, where survival will demand every ounce of his intellect, courage, and unbreakable spirit. And even here, in the face of overwhelming darkness, Jacques Lusseyran remains unbroken, a symbol of hope, defiance, and resistance against the Nazi regime.
Arriving at Buchenwald, Jacques Lusseyran is plunged into a world of fear, brutality, and despair. Yet even here, his blindness becomes a strange advantage, sharpening his other senses to an extraordinary degree as he learns the rhythms of guards, the layout of the camp, and the patterns of danger that others might miss. And while the prisoners around him are broken by violence and hunger, Jacques remains alert, gathering information, memorizing every detail that could help him survive, sensing who is trustworthy and who might betray him, and quietly connecting with fellow prisoners to share knowledge and hope, using his mind as a weapon when the Gestapo and SS rely on brute force. And in this hellish environment, his calm, composed presence inspires others, giving them courage to endure, while he continually plans, observes, and adapts, finding small ways to resist the oppressors without being seen, whether through subtle communication, alerting comrades to danger, or simply maintaining an unbroken spirit. And even in the heart of darkness, Jacques' inner light guides him, allowing him to survive where many others would succumb, demonstrating that true strength is not always physical, that perception, intelligence, and courage can outmatch even the most ruthless enemies, and that in every whispered observation, every careful choice, and every act of mental resistance, the blind boy who once led a youth network in Paris continues to outsmart the Nazis, proving that no darkness, however complete, can extinguish vision,
when the mind and spirit remain unbroken. In the harsh reality of Buchenwald, every day is a battle for survival, and Jacques Lusseyran, though blind, quickly learns to navigate the camp through sound, smell, and intuition, memorizing the movements of guards, the routines of the barracks, and the subtle signs of danger that others overlook. And while the prisoners around him succumb to fear and despair, he remains alert, quietly observing, connecting with trustworthy inmates, and sharing crucial information that can protect lives, all while conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary attention. And in this brutal environment, he discovers the power of perception as a weapon, noticing the smallest details, a shifted shovel, a change in the guard's tone, a sudden silence, that signal threats or opportunities. And using these observations, he helps others evade punishment, warns of incoming inspections, and finds small ways to resist the oppressors without drawing notice, all while maintaining a presence that inspires hope in those who feel completely powerless. And though hunger, disease, and brutality weigh on every prisoner, Jacques uses his mental clarity and disciplined mind to stay strong, memorizing what he sees through others' descriptions, planning contingencies, and preserving knowledge for the survival of himself and his comrades. And even in moments when despair seems overwhelming, he draws on his inner light, the extraordinary perception that guided him through the streets of Paris, turning fear into awareness and awareness into action, demonstrating that survival is not just about physical strength, but about intelligence, courage, and resilience. And in the darkest corners of Buchenwald, Jacques Lusseyran's ability to sense, adapt, and inspire becomes his greatest weapon, allowing him not only to endure the unimaginable horrors of the camp, but to maintain hope, guide others, and continue resisting the Nazis in ways that few could imagine, proving that even in the depths of terror, insight and courage can outshine oppression, and that a blind man can see more than most men with eyes ever could.
Every day in Buchenwald is a test of endurance, and Jacques Lusseyran adapts to the camp's brutal rhythm with a remarkable combination of perception, intellect, and courage, learning to navigate the barracks, work details, and roll calls through sound and instinct, noticing patterns that others miss, the way guards pace, the subtle cues that signal inspections, the whispers among prisoners that reveal hidden dangers, and he uses this knowledge to protect himself and those around him, sharing warnings, discreet guidance, and encouragement to keep hope alive in an environment designed to crush it. And while hunger, disease, and violence strip others of their strength, Jacques relies on mental discipline, memorizing routines, reading human behavior, and turning his blindness into an advantage, as it allows him to observe without being noticed, listen without attracting attention, and sense danger before it strikes. And in these small victories, in the careful preservation of life and morale, he practices a quiet form of resistance, refusing to be broken by fear or oppression, finding moments of strategy in the chaos, and inspiring others with his calm confidence and unwavering moral clarity, showing that true leadership can exist even in the most hopeless circumstances. And as the days stretch into weeks and months, Jacques' presence becomes a lifeline for those around him, a reminder that insight and courage can outmatch brute force, that survival depends not only on strength, but on intelligence, awareness, and resilience. And in this relentless struggle, the blind boy who once led a youth network in Paris continues to outsmart the Nazis in ways they could never anticipate, proving that even in the darkest corners of human cruelty, perception, strategy, and the indomitable spirit of one determined individual can turn despair into quiet defiance, making him a symbol of hope, survival, and resistance amid the horrors of Buchenwald.
The stench of smoke and unwashed bodies filled the air as Jacques Lusseyran moved silently through the overcrowded barracks of Buchenwald, his heightened senses alert to every footstep, every whisper, every subtle change in the rhythm of the guards' patrols. And though the camp's brutality was constant, he learned to turn observation into survival, noticing who could be trusted, who might betray a word, and where small opportunities for quiet resistance could be found, guiding fellow prisoners with discreet signals, whispered advice, or simply the reassurance of calm presence. And in these small acts, he became a pillar of hope, a strategist in a place designed to strip people of all agency, memorizing routines, predicting inspections, and exploiting tiny lapses in the attention of the SS to keep himself and others safe, all while conserving energy in a world dominated by hunger and disease. And as he adapted to this relentless environment, he developed an almost preternatural awareness of human behavior, sensing tension, fear, and courage in others, allowing him to coordinate small acts of defiance and survival without attracting notice. And though the physical suffering was immense, Jacques proved that resistance could exist in the mind as much as in action, that perception, intelligence, and careful planning could be powerful weapons against oppression. And even in the darkest corners of Buchenwald, his presence inspired courage and steadiness in others, showing that insight and determination could outmatch the brutality of the Nazis, and that a blind boy who had once led a youth network in Paris could continue to protect, guide, and resist, turning observation into survival and terror into quiet defiance, proving that even in unimaginable horror, the mind and spirit could remain unbroken.
The clang of the morning bell echoed through the camp, a harsh reminder of the relentless routine that defined every day in Buchenwald. And Jacques Lusseyran, though blind, moved through it with precision, relying on memory, intuition, and the acute awareness he had honed over years of survival, noticing subtle shifts in the guards' patterns, the whispers among prisoners, and the tiny opportunities that could mean life or death. And while most around him were consumed by fear and despair, Jacques became a quiet center of guidance, offering advice, warnings, and encouragement to help others endure, sharing mental maps of the camp, predicting inspections, and using his perception to keep himself and his fellow inmates just out of reach of punishment. And in the midst of hunger, sickness, and unrelenting violence, he preserved a sense of hope, showing that even small acts of resistance, holding information, maintaining vigilance, and inspiring courage could carry extraordinary weight. And as the months wore on, Jacques learned to read people as acutely as he read his surroundings, sensing intentions, spotting hidden threats, and building alliances that increased chances of survival, all while maintaining his own discipline and calm. And in doing so, he turned his blindness into a strength, a tool for observing what others overlooked. And through these careful strategies and subtle leadership, he continued to protect his comrades, preserve morale, and defy the Nazis in ways they could never detect, proving that resistance takes many forms, and that intellect, courage, and moral clarity can outmatch even the most brutal force. And as the war edged closer to its turning points outside the fences of Buchenwald, Jacques' resilience, perception, and quiet acts of defiance ensured that he and those around him retained something the Nazis could never destroy: the human spirit, unbroken, aware, and ready to survive against all odds.
The gates of Buchenwald finally opened, and the air, once thick with fear, seemed to shift as Allied forces arrived. But for Jacques Lusseyran, survival was not just about stepping into freedom. It was the culmination of years of perception, courage, and resilience. For every day in the camp had honed his mind and spirit, teaching him to navigate danger, to protect others, and to resist oppression, even in the smallest ways. And as he walked out into the light, he felt the weight of loss and the enormity of what he and his fellow prisoners had endured, the faces of friends who did not survive etched into memory, the lessons of vigilance, empathy, and moral clarity indelibly imprinted on his being. Yet even in the shadow of this suffering, hope emerged, a quiet but undeniable force that had guided him from Paris to the barracks of Buchenwald. And now, free from immediate peril, Jacques carried with him the extraordinary understanding that true vision transcends sight, that courage and insight can outmatch brutality, and that leadership is measured not by command, but by the lives one protects and the strength one inspires in others. And as he re-entered a world still scarred by war, he understood that survival was only the first step, that the responsibility to bear witness, to educate, and to honor those lost was part of the freedom he now possessed. And in every memory of whispered warnings, calculated risks, and quiet defiance, Jacques Lusseyran's story became more than survival. It became a testament to the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, perception, intelligence, and moral courage can light a path through unimaginable horror, and that one blind boy's extraordinary vision had outsmarted some of history's most ruthless forces, leaving a legacy of resilience, hope, and unwavering defiance that would endure far beyond the gates of Buchenwald.